Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar, Bridging Scales, Multi-Level Governance and Vertical Integration in Adaptation. Today's webinar is co-hosted by Regions 4 and the National Adaptation Plan Global Network. My name is Christian Ledwell, and I'm the Knowledge Manager with the NAP Global Network Secretariat, based in Ottawa. I'll be co-moderating today with my colleague, Yvonne. Yvonne, over to you.
Thank you, Christian. Hello, everyone. My name is Yvonne Lopez Arce, and I am a policy analyst with the NAP Global Network Secretariat. Thank you for joining us today. To get us started, a few housekeeping points. Today's session will be 45 minutes long. Simultaneous translation into Spanish and French is available. And please feel free to say hello and introduce yourselves by typing your name and affiliation in the chat box. We are recording this session and we'll share it with you and slides. We will share the video and slides, with participants as a follow-up. If you have any questions, comments, or technical issues, please just let us know in the chat box. And we have a very exciting panel of speakers. They will share their knowledge and expertise on climate change adaptation governance. From Regions 4, we are joined by Eloise Chicou, who is Regions 4 Climate Action and Resilience Program Manager. She leads Regions 4 Program on Adaptation and Engagement in Advocacy within the UNFCCC and other climate-relevant bodies. She has a decade-long career dedicated to sustainable development, water management, and climate across organizations like UNDP, WaterAid, Sanitation and Water for All, and the French Water Partnership. Melissa Krang, Regions Adapt Program Manager at Regions 4. She focuses on adaptation and advocacy within climate-relevant bodies like UNFCCC. With a decade-long career in sustainable development and environmental projects, she emphasizes water, energy, and climate. And from the NAP Global Network, we are joined by Mauricio Luna Rodriguez, who is a policy advisor on climate change adaptation governance. Mauricio has over 15 years of experience working in sustainable development, leading climate change adaptation programs in collaboration with governments, civil society, and the private sector. We'll hear from Mauricio first. He will share the results of a new analysis by the NAP Global Network on multi-level governance, and more specifically, on vertical integration in national adaptation plan processes. Mauricio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who has joined. Thank you for being here with us. I see some familiar names that have joined and some new names, which is very exciting. So for some of you who might not be familiar with the NAP Global Network, we do support through three main pillars, which are the national level action, South-South, field learning and knowledge processes, as you can see here on the slide. On the first pillar, we have directly provided technical support to over 60 countries in the Global South. For the second pillar, as you can see, more than 400 people have participated in our field learning events, and we have produced over 300 knowledge products. You can go to the next slide, please. Now, what I'm going to present to you today is this recent report. Is the first ever report on progress on vertical integration in the National Adaptation Plan process. As you can see, this is an analysis of the strategic linkages between the national and the subnational levels. Please do the next. So what do we mean by vertical integration in the NAP process? This is the practice of creating intentional and strategic linkages between national and subnational governance levels in climate change, adaptation planning, implementation, and monitoring, evaluation, and learning. To the next one, please. So the NAP process can be summarized in three broad phases: the planning, implementation, and the MEL, or monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And each of those phases represent entry points for vertical integration. As you can see here on the slide, a lot of the countries have and continue to incorporate different actors from the subnational level in the planning, for example, subnational governments, CSOs, or even the private sector at the local levels. In the implementation phase, in which a lot of countries are moving to at this moment, subnational level authorities, but also local private sector actors and communities are very, very important. And in the monitoring, evaluation, and learning, a specific initiative that happened at the subnational level are key to track progress, especially those that take place and are led by subnational level authorities. If we can move to the next one, please. You probably noticed that as part of the NAP process, we also propose some enabling factors, which are here. And these enabling factors also mean different entry points for vertical integration. For example, if we look at leadership, you can identify different champions at different governance levels that really call for action that connects the dots between the different levels of governance. If we move to institutional arrangements, these are very important elements of verticality and the coordination between different levels. And you can use existing multi-level governance systems or emerging or new multi-level governance arrangements that the different countries are creating. Moving to engagement, as I have mentioned, it's important to engage different subnational level actors, civil society organizations, local private sectors, and subnational level authorities, including indigenous communities and some other local actors, such as women. Moving to data, knowledge, and communications, this will facilitate a continuous two-way information sharing between the national and the subnational. The last two, I would like to emphasize skills and capacities and finance. When it comes to skills and capacities, it's really important to enhance climate-related and context-specific institutional and human competencies at the subnational levels. And clearly with finance, it's key to incorporate climate resilience considerations into finance allocation processes, such as those that are allocated at the subnational level, especially subnational government budgets. Now, after this brief overview on vertical integration in the NAP process, I would like to move on to some of the results of this analysis. Please keep in mind that this was a research based on the review of 45 multisectorial NAP documents. These documents had been submitted to the UNFCCC as of July 31st last year. And you can find all of these documents on NAP Central's webpage. Next one, please. Now, the first key finding that I would like to share with you is the role that is assigned to subnational governments in the NAP process. As you can see here on the slide, a great majority of NAP documents do assign a role in the implementation of the NAP document, of the NAP activities. And this shouldn't be a surprise. Subnational level governments do play a very important role in moving to implementation. But as you can see here in the slide, they also assign an important role in the planning. And since this is cyclical, it will be a recurring call to incorporate subnational level authorities. In the MEL, there is some room for improvement as subnational government authorities will need to scale up their action in monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems. And for some NAP documents, there is no role assigned to subnational level authorities, but you have to keep in mind that some of the NAP documents belong to countries that might be very small in size. For example, small island development states that might not have a subnational level authority as such. Moving to the next key finding that we wanted to share with you is the reference of non-governmental actors that are relevant for vertical integration. And we have very good news here. A great majority of NAPs do provide for reference civil society organizations, as you can see, and also micro, small, and medium size enterprises, as well as communities. talking about communities, if we move to the next slide, we also wanted to find out if there are any references to community-based and locally led approaches. As you can see, around half of the NAP documents do reference directly community-based adaptation approaches, and 40% also reference the emerging concept of locally led adaptation. There is room for an improvement in about a third of those documents, and there is a proportion of NAP documents that do mention other community-led concepts. Some of them are very creative, like locally driven, or for example, they do mention ecosystem-based adaptation in connection to communities and grassroots action. Now, that was in terms of key recommendations, key findings. But moving to some of the key recommendations, we break it down, starting with some recommendations for national governments' NAP teams. We think it's important that at the national level, we strengthen multi-level institutional arrangements and coordination mechanisms. As I mentioned, those that already exist or the new mechanisms that are being put in place. It's also important to establish systems to provide financial flows, including budgeting to subnational levels for climate change adaptation. And also, we think it's key to engage non-governmental subnational level actors, for example, from civil society organizations, small businesses, local communities, small-scale producers, and other relevant actors, such as indigenous communities. If we can move to the next slide. We also provide a set of recommendations for subnational governments specifically. We think it's important for them to prioritize the strengthening of their institutional and human capacities so they can contribute from moving from the planning phase to the implementation phase of adaptation. We also encourage them to request building of capacities on monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems so they can track, assess, and report their adaptation actions that they are already putting into place and contribute to national level NEL systems. We also have a couple of recommendations for our development partners. The first one is that they document and share best practices on multi-level coordination in diverse governance systems in the NAP process, from federal government systems to unitary and everything else in between. And this is something that we will be working on from NAPGN during this year. If we can go back to the previous one for a second. We think it's also important to assist in the strengthening of data and information systems across levels for monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Now, if we can continue to the next slide. Finally, we have some recommendations for funders. We think it will be important that they provide dedicated funding for vertical integration to advance the implementation of the NAP process, but also to provide predictable, flexible, and strategic funding for long-term capacity building, especially for some national governments to enable vertical integration in the NAP process. And last but not least, for the UNFCCC processes, we think it will be key to provide technical guidance and training on how to build and sustain human, institutional, and systems capacities more broadly, including subnational governments for NAP implementation. And you can scan this QR code to access our publication. We are also going to post the link on the chat. And with the next slide, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I pass it back to our colleagues. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mauricio. And thank you very much for the organizer for having us here. And hello to all participants. Just to give you a brief background for those who are not familiar with our work. If you can see on the next slide, Regions 4 is a network of regional governments including states, provinces, and regions. And for over 20 years, we have been advocating for the representation of states and regions in global forums such as the United Nations and the European Union. Our engagement and advocacy goes across 3 programs, which are biodiversity, climate change, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. So regional governments and local territories are the first impacted by climate change, and they really are at the forefront of responding to the climate crisis. They have the responsibility of developing integrated solutions for resilience adaptation at the level of their territory. And for that, they have strong assets to do so with their deep understanding of their people and communities and their authority over critical sectors. So this is why they can really help in bridging the urban and rural divide. So we strongly believe that subnational governments can really serve as innovation labs, scaling up local initiatives and bringing best practice to the national discussions and planning, notably national adaptation plans, which is why at COP21 in Paris, we launch our flagship initiative, Regions Adapt, that I'll present a bit more on the next slide. So this initiative brings together over 70 regional governments, empowering them to really develop regional adaptation plans and take meaningful climate actions. When states and regions join us, we ask of them 4 key commitments, which are first, assessing climate change impacts, looking especially at vulnerable communities. Second, adopting ambitious adaptation plans. Third is implementing adaptation action in key sectors such as water, nature, agriculture. And fourth, which brings us back to the importance of MEL, is reporting annually on their adaptation measures and on their progress through our collaboration with CDP. This progress and data that we're collecting, notably through our Regions Adapt annual reports publications, really serve to engage states and regions in official non-state actor constituencies and platforms, such as the Marrakesh Partnership for Climate Action, the UN Global Climate Action Portal, and as well as in the Race to Resilience, which is a global campaign launched in 2021 by the UN, which aims at increasing the resilience of vulnerable communities. So now let's delve into these recent data on the next slide. We can see that last year, among the over 100 regions that reported through the CDP states and regions are very much progressing on the localization of NAPs. In most cases, they're developing their own regional adaptation plans. So 64% have already completed vulnerable assessments, with 17% currently in progress. And we have more than 70 states and regions that have formulated climate action plans and strategy encompassing adaptation. So regional governments are really acting on several fronts, advancing water management, reforestation, acting on coastal and biodiversity protection. But what interested us last year is that we've noticed that they're notably developing really interesting mechanisms for engaging citizens and community to plan and implement adaptation actions. So our last report, which really focused on how to integrate climate justice and adaptation planning, we really shared some of the recommendations and some highlights of what our Regions Adapt members are doing on the ground. On the next slide, please. So climate justice, as we all know, is crucial for addressing climate change because we all know that climate change impacts disproportionately affects vulnerable communities and already exacerbates existing social disparities. So in line with the IPCC findings, our report really emphasizes the integration of climate justice principles, which has the recognition, distributive, and procedural dimension, which more simply means respecting diverse values and cultural viewpoints, ensuring equitable distribution of climate policy benefits and burdens, and fostering fairness and equity in decision-making processes. Our report also shares a research index with metrics that really can help government from all levels to reflect on justice dimension, to assess their documents, or to support the development of strategies. And looking at what subnational governments are doing on the ground, due to their close proximity to citizens, we can really see that they're acting on these recommendations and leading on some innovative initiatives. On the next slide, please. So one of the recommendations, yeah, I have it here, is to really integrate the vulnerability community perspective in the vulnerability assessment. Make sure that we have represented the plural views. Our review shares diverse cases of how these subnational have integrated those, with example from Scotland, from Basque Country, from British Columbia, and from Wales. But just to share a little bit more on one example, for example, the Basque Country in Spain really took a proactive look by publishing last year the climate change in the Basque Country from a gender perspective report, which I'm showing on the screen. And in this report, they really tried to analyze the causes and the effects of climate action, but from a gender point of view. And they have shared 18 actions to bridge climate action and gender, notably looking at how to transform the social and economic models, and also how to promote transversal approaches within the administration itself. On the next slide, please. Yes, for promoting inclusive and participatory policymaking is another key recommendations that resulted in our review. And we can already see that around the globe, many regions, such as, just to give some example, Jalisco in Mexico, Catalonia in Spain, or KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, have recently created participatory and advisory bodies that are really representative of the diversity of their society, including women, indigenous people, disabled people, migrants, and sexually diverse also groups. So other groups are also very focused on creating engagement strategies that are documenting their efforts in having transparent and inclusive engagement processes. But something that really came out from our research is that equity does not just mean being invited to the table. It also means making sure that everyone has the capacity to actually participate in planning, but also in implementation phase. Some examples from KwaZulu-Natal province in South Africa really showed active efforts in inclusive representation of the participation. For example, the KwaZulu Climate Change Strategy, which is the region's critical planning instrument, was really developed through extensive consultation with very focused group sessions with traditional leaders, youth, and both focusing on online and on-site participation to make sure to really include everyone. One of KwaZulu-Natal's flagship initiative also, the Transformative Riverine Management Program, is a locally led adaptation project which combined citizen science, early warning system, ecosystem restoration, and this led to the survival of more than 500 people during the April 2022 floods, thanks again to the involvement of local community during implementation phase. And a last example that we wanted to share on the next slide was how regional government can really help in mainstreaming climate justice in their broader adaptations and climate strategies. So last year, the government of Minas Gerais in Brazil released its state climate action plan. And what really sets apart this plan is that it really integrated climate justice as a key pillar alongside mitigation, adaptation, and innovation. And the development process of this plan involved over 50 opportunities for participation, ensuring that diverse voices were heard, notably from historically marginalized communities. And the plan really prioritizes how climate justice principle can really help in fighting against the inequalities, especially for groups such as Black and Indigenous people and Quilombolas communities. This plan is aligned with the 2016 National Plan for Adaptation, And it really shows how integrating national priorities into states and municipal planning while focusing on climate justice can really support the most vulnerable population, like promoting both human right development and policy decision. And I think something that was also very noteworthy in this plan is that it has included very strong link also with the sustainable development goals. So in conclusion, we would say that subnational governments, given their proximity to citizen and coordination efforts, can really act as key players in understanding the vulnerability of their territory. On the next slide, we have incorporated some of the recommendations, but I'll invite you to explore them more in our report. But what we really wanted to show is how local and regional examples are very interesting for vertical integration, because it really can show how local action aligning with national priorities can really help meeting the needs of more vulnerable communities. So one of our recommendations for more national level would be that prioritizing climate justice already at a national level, providing guidance would be a great support, but also providing support to subnational government through effective decentralization of climate action and finance can significantly accelerate just adaptation. So that is why we were very happy to be sharing a bit with you some examples and highlights from our report that you can, I think, scan on the next slide. And we're very happy to be here in this conversation. I'll give back the floor to our colleagues.
Thanks so much, Melissa. So we're now going to pass to Eloise Gicou to share reflections and takeaways on what COP28 meant for multi-level governance of adaptation. Eloise, over to you.
Thank you, Christian. Hi, everyone. So backing what Mauricio and Melissa have been saying, we really see that there has been progress in integration. And really COP28 was a key milestone in many ways for this. Really, we saw the UAE presidency taking a strong role to engage with regions and cities, really recognizing the pivotal role in driving change from the ground up. And one of the standing innovation was the creation of the Local Climate Action Summit, LCAS, which was the first 2 days of COP, which was a high-level summit organized by Bloomberg Philanthropies and other key networks of cities and regions, where you had hundreds of regional and subnational leaders and cities coming together to look at catalyzing transformation regarding finance, energy transition, adaptation at the local and subnational level. And it was really interesting because out of this mobilization came a strong push within the global stocktake, so that the global stocktake document that would result from the COP would really capture the progress that is happening at the local and regional level as a contribution of the overall progress. And we really see today within the outcome document mentions of the subnational and the local level. Another key milestone that came out of COP, and maybe that's, I would say, the most innovative and the most ambitious, is out of this local climate action summit came out the initiative, which is called the CHAMP initiative, the Coalition for High Ambition Multi-Level Partnership, where city and regional networks and the Bloomberg Philanthropies really mobilized 72 national governments to endorse and commit to reinforcing collaboration for the implementation of the NDCs and for taking action that would be collaborative with subnational levels on mitigation and adaptation, with an idea of voluntary review of progress of how they are collaborating with the subnational level. And I would say this is quite groundbreaking because it gives this extra push and this extra support from national governments of a want to reflect in their NDCs, and I would almost extend to NAPs, the idea of collaboration at all levels of governments. And finally, just to state maybe a last initiative that I think shows this progress is we really saw at COP28 the follow-ups to COP27 around what was launched at COP27, which is the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda. The Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda is led by the climate champions, and essentially it sets 30 adaptation outcomes from non-party stakeholders, but also to inform national governments on food, water, coastal management, human settlements. And it looks at setting common outcomes, but also on reporting of progress of non-party stakeholders to these common goals. And I would say that the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda can really be and come and inform national adaptation plan and even the discussions on the global goal on adaptation as a contribution from non-party stakeholders on how they can support national governments on adaptation. So I'll stop there, but I would like to maybe make a call that, you know, obviously many initiatives were launched, but now it's really the implementation phase. And we're very happy to see this collaboration with IISD to continue informing how regional and local governments can inform the NAPs.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that presentation, Eloise. We will now like to open up the conversation for questions from the audience. Please feel free to write your questions and comments in the chat box. You can do it in Spanish, French, or English. And Christian and myself will share this with the panelists to respond to. And while you write your questions, let me remind you that we will be sharing the recording of this session and the presentation slides as a follow-up with all of you. Let's see if we have questions. In the meantime, maybe I can start by asking Eloise and Melissa. You've shared some really good highlights and standout examples of subnational government making progress on adaptation planning and implementation. What lessons do you think that these subnational governments experience have for the national government teams working on adaptation?
Sure, I can answer this question. So I think, you know, we've been talking a lot how regional governments have been localizing or regionalizing the NAPs. And there has been significant progress indeed. However, we need to talk about the critical gaps. I think there are still relevant critical gaps. We don't see everywhere sustainable collaborative mechanisms for inclusive consultation within the NAPs, and this needs to be reinforced. And I'll just take maybe an example. I think Sao Paulo is probably in the call, so they can also come and complement what I will say. But if you look at the government of Sao Paulo, at the moment, they're working on the Climate Adaptation Resilient Plan. And they have been consulting the NAP and looking at what their municipalities and the international level is doing on the NAPs. But there's still more work to be done at the level of Brazil to really allow for coordination mechanism around the NAP at the national level. But there is something very interesting happening, is that there is in Brazil an organization that's called ABEMA, which is the Brazilian Association of State for the Environment. And what's interesting in ABEMA is it regroups all states and representatives, and it has this common will to exchange between states, and also it could play a critical role in allowing for coordination, for inputs and collaboration with the NAPs. So this is maybe a recommendation, and I think Mauricio, you mentioned it. I think sometimes it's about creating new mechanisms, but it's also sometimes reinforcing mechanisms of collaboration and coordination that do exist sometimes between state structures. We see a similar structure in Mexico, for example, and then bring in maybe within these structures that can collaborate with the NAPs some topics and some good practices that are coming from the regional level, such as what Melissa said about climate justice. Brazil is really gathering expertise, such as in Minas Gerais, around climate justice. This could be reflected back into a coordination mechanism and within the review of a NAP or within the implementation of a NAP. And maybe just a final recommendation is obviously financing. We work with a lot of developing regions that are experiencing obviously some critical gaps around having the means to even align their regional adaptation plans with the NAPs. And this is part of what we're fighting for the Global Goal on Adaptation, but it's maybe a call for consideration to our national counterparts in this call today.
Thanks so much, Eloise. And so we have a question from a colleague in Ghana asking about how they can get more involved in adaptation planning in Ghana. And I note that we have on the line as well our colleague Bob Mantia, who has done a lot of work at the district level, working on vulnerability assessments and on as well as then taking those vulnerability assessments forward into district level adaptation plans. So I would encourage Bob, perhaps you can drop your contact in the chat, but I would say the NAP Global Network has been working with the EPA in Ghana, who are leading the National Adaptation Plan process, and they take a very inclusive approach, and so I do hope the colleague is able to make connections there. We also have another question in the chat, which I might direct to Melissa and Mauricio, and the question is, how can municipalities get more involved in national adaptation plan processes? Over to you. Thanks.
Lisa, if you want to go ahead, and then I'll provide a few points after you.
What we've noticed on the ground is that generally there's a lot, of course, of networks, right? Doing support also for municipalities at the local level. But what we've noticed is how justly the regional government can also push forward and support on the localization. If we took the example of the Minas Gerais, something I did not mention is that the Minas Gerais developed their vulnerability index, where they really looked at mapping all on the territory, looking at sensitivity, exposure, looking at trying to understand how the different municipalities are vulnerable to climate change. And through this helped them prioritize which are the most vulnerable municipalities and support them in developing their own municipality plans.
Yeah, well, to contribute to the whole conversation, first, I would like to emphasize thank the examples that the colleagues from Regions 4 have provided, because it really give us an idea of how those targets that are set up in the national adaptation, the plan processes, can be put into practice, including those connections with the COP results. And I just wanted to add quickly that for those who are more familiar with the COP instruments, the GST and the GGA also provide some interesting elements of multi-level coordination. For example, the GST acknowledged the role of different subnational level authorities that have been mentioned, such as subnational governments, indigenous people, and local communities, and also encourages cooperation of non-party stakeholders at different levels, from the local, subnational, national, and international. But also the UAE Framework for Global Climate Resilience, which is the new name for the GGA, urges parties and invites non-party stakeholders to accelerate action at all levels, which is what we're talking about today. Going back to the question of municipalities and our assessment of their participation being the first level of engagement in most countries for local communities, and having limited capacities, we find that for them, a good practice is to create associations of municipalities, of collaborate with each other, because they constantly share the ecosystem, share like the economic activities, and they share similar challenges. And if they do collaborate with each other in particular regions, this really allows municipalities to scale up their action and learn from each other. So yeah, that would be my input on that specific question.
Thank you so much to all of you. This next question is for Mauricio. And on vertical integration, while looking at documents submitted to UNFCCC is a good start, what are the next steps? How will we be looking at how vertical integration is actually being implemented?
That's a wonderful question, because this is indeed what we would like to have a deeper dive on during this year. We would like to capture examples of this implementation at the subnational level that really speaks to how funds are being channeled to subnational levels, how capacities are being strengthened, and how those existing and new coordination mechanisms are working. Because coordinating between different levels and among different stakeholders is not always easy. This is a process, and this is exactly what we would like to explore more, so we can provide some good lessons learned and some good practices. So countries that have similar multi-level governance setups, let's say federal government or more semi-federal or unitarian states, can see what other geographies that have a similar multi-level system, what they're doing, how are they incorporating the voices, for example, of indigenous groups, of local producers, and some of the most marginalized communities into the climate adaptation activities. So I will say stay tuned to our knowledge products, because this is something that we would like to explore during this year in collaboration with our partners, such as Regions 4.
Thanks so much, Mauricio. And just to echo that point, I think it's really worth noting that there's a lot happening. There's a lot of progress on national adaptation plan processes that isn't captured in the documents that are submitted, which are a really important source of information. But a lot of good work, including we have a colleague joining us, Halima from Nigeria, who's leading the NAP process in Nigeria, and I know that they've done quite a lot of good work that isn't yet captured in a formal national adaptation plan document submitted to the UNFCCC. Our next question, which I'll direct to Eloise and Melissa, we have a colleague who says climate justice is such an important dimension in the global South. Based on your experience, what would you see as the time period for really integrating climate justice as a priority in a national adaptation plan? Thanks.
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I can answer it, because I think it would really depend on the context of the country, obviously. But I think, first of all, it's about steps, the cycle, right? I think the first step is really making sure that within a vulnerability assessment, there's a real analysis of people, of this question of the different types of people that are involved and impacted by climate change. And this depends how long it will take, because it can be very difficult to analyze all the different types of people that are impacted. It's just to the sheer amount of data that is required. But I would say it's more a question of cycle. So vulnerability assessment that would take into account the most vulnerable, and then looking at the planning, how it can be aligned at the national level, and then looking at the implementation and the monitoring. And something that we've really seen with regional governments is the difficulty in the monitoring to have a vision of how an adaptation action impacts the most vulnerable, in terms of how does the action generate positive benefits. Surveys can be done, consultations can be done, but it can require a long time to be able to gather that data. So I think maybe I'm not answering completely the question, but I think it would really, I think it's making sure that within your cycle and adaptation of the NAP, making sure that there is an incorporation of climate justice, and then following those steps to make sure that every level of the cycle of adaptation, the climate justice is a component.
Thank you. We have another question, and I'm gonna open the floor for the three of you to answer. To what extent can top-down obligations in terms of adaptation policies be effective? Because there are an increased number of countries adopting climate laws under which subnational governments might be obliged to adopt an adaptation strategy or plan, which could result in more policy documents, and sometimes they don't have the capacity. How does it make a difference in terms of implementation compared to a bottom-up dynamic led by the subnational governments themselves that will be taking the initiative instead of top down? Sorry.
I can start quickly on that one, Yvonne. From our experience and the analysis of the different processes, we think that a combination of a top-down and bottom-up approach is the best way to go. You know, on one hand, clearly, some of the most pressing adaptation needs come from the local level, and you need to incorporate the local voices. That's key, and there's not discussion around how important that is. But also, some adaptation decisions and some adaptation challenges go beyond the local level. They, for example, could be happening at the catchment level. They could be challenges that have a national level scope. Let's say energy systems are usually systems that work at the national level. Some are even a regional level and a specific set of countries with more led the international elements of it and global as well. So to answer in that question in a very short fashion, we think the combination of bottom up and top down is the best way to go. And I see the colleagues nodding from region, so I pass it to them to complement.
No, I think you said it well, Mauricio. I think the national level brings the incentive and the regulation and, let's say, kickstarts the process, but the bottom up can bring in the innovations, can bring in the specificities and the integration with actors. So that's why I agree with you. I think it's they need to go hand in hand.
Great. Well, thanks so much. I think that we're now coming to the end of this session, but I'd like to perhaps pass to our colleague Bob Nantiao to speak to his experience in Ghana, and then we may pass for one last closing thought from our panelists. So, Bob, are you able to unmute your mic and share your comment, please?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Thank you.
Right. So what was the question again? I think I missed that.
So, well, first of all, thanks so much for joining us here today. So based on what you've heard from the presenters, how does this resonate with you based on the work that you've been doing at the district level on adaptation planning in Ghana?
Right. So yes, and I think that is very good timing for our works here. As part of the NAP process, Ghana has followed a kind of a vertical integration process where we are building up and down. So we used a district. We have a very well organized local governance system. So we have a very solid subnational kind of governance arrangement. So what we're doing now is we're using the subnational institutions that we have to build local capacity. And we have in the last year or two completed a vulnerability assessment for a number of districts which were serving as pilots. We just selected one of those districts and then completed a district-specific adaptation plan, which incidentally, just before this call, we were making an arrangement to go back there to disseminate the information within the VA process and also the district adaptation plan. What we haven't been focusing on is the issue of climate justice, which I've taken a lot of notes on here in terms of how do we ensure that we incorporate climate justice in all aspects of the works that we are doing. So it will be part of the conversations that we will be having. The other issue of long-term capacity building, which I'm very much interested in, because what we notice is the capacity at the local governance level is not as strong as it should be. So me, as a leader of the process, I'm always concerned about when we are done and we go back, what happens to the process going forward. So we are in the process of building capacity, but we will need some kind of sustained efforts and some financing support to help build the needed capacity for a much longer period than we will be in at the district level. So in short, I would say everything that we have discussed here has been very helpful to the Ghana process. There are a lot of learnings that we are documenting and will come out with and publish them very soon. So maybe in another conversation, we probably will be in a position to share much more than we can at this point. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bob. I really appreciate you sharing those reflections.
That's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Well, I might then pass back to our panelists just to share one final takeaway or reflection or message that you'd like to share on this webinar on multi-level governance and vertical integration of adaptation. Eloise, can we start with you, please?
No, sure. Actually, to go back to what was just said, I think capacity is a major challenge. And I would say it's at all levels. At the local level, it's capacity to develop a district or a regional adaptation plan, especially in developing regions with the right finance and the right data, for example. But at the national level, it's also being aware of what's happening at the local and regional level to be able to shape policies that are integrating and take into account the reality of the ground. So that's something we want to build. And I think Mauricio mentioned it. I think there's a role for networks here to make sure that we showcase good practices. And we're very happy to continue collaborating with IAZ on this because more could be done to showcase how do you build capacity to allow for vertical integration at the different levels, notably at the regional and local level.
Thanks so much, Eloise. Melissa, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sorry, my connection dropped for the couple past minutes. But I think something that I would like to take away, as Mauricio said, is indeed the importance of combining both top-down and bottom-up integration, because I think like the challenges are so far ahead, right? We need to have all possible momentum that are going forward. And something also that we have noticed, Mauricio really in his presentation highlighted the importance of monitoring, evaluation, and learning processes. And this is something also, a discussion that we hear a lot is a big concern within the subnational governments. There's really the question of how to really plan for impactful adaptation measure, but how to make sure that they're effective on the ground. Mauricio?
Thank you very much. If I had to highlight one key message for this webinar, it will be we're moving into implementation. And subnational level authorities and actors are key for a successful implementation. We really need to provide the resources, the capacities, the skills, and even the technologies that we'll need to move from planning to implementation. This is a pressing issue. And I think there is a lot of work for us to do. So I look forward to this collaboration, and I look forward to keeping in touch with all of our webinar participants in the future. So stay tuned, and thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you so much, Mauricio, and thank you again, Melissa, Eloise, for sharing these really valuable insights in today's event. So colleagues from Regions 4 and NAP Global Network will be participating in a number of upcoming international events this year, including the UNFCCC's NAP Expo in Bangladesh in April, the 18th International Conference on Community-Based Adaptation in Tanzania in May, as well as the 2024 UN Biodiversity COP, or COP16, and the 2024 UN Climate Change Conference, COP29. So we hope that this is just the start of the conversation. Please do keep in touch, and we hope that we'll be able to connect with you there. And Yvonne, I'll pass to you for the last word, please.
Great, thank you. Just a reminder that we will be sharing the recording and the presentations, and we look forward to continuing this conversation on multi-level governance and vertical integration of adaptation. If you have any questions that we weren't able to cover today, please feel free to contact us at the email addresses for the NAP Global Network and Regions 4 that were shown on the slide. We'd also welcome you to follow us on social media because we will be posting new insights on these topics that are so important for everyone. So thank you so much and have a great day, evening, wherever you are.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.